Watamuli, everyone, and welcome to the July Indigenous Research Support Network. Thank you to those who have joining us in person and online. It's my great pleasure that today we're welcoming Prof. Yvonne Cadet-James and Dr. Janine Gertz on building Gugu Badhun self-determination and self-government. As you know, our seminars this year have been focused on re-energising work around Indigenous self-determination, and we've got a great one today. So I'm going to take a few minutes to properly welcome our speakers. First, let me acknowledge the country that you are all joining us from, those at Numbabada campus, the lands of Yugundji, Jabagai and Yidinji peoples, and the Bebegu Yamba campus, and acknowledging the Bindal and Wulgurukaba peoples. I join you from Naarm on Wurundjeri country, and wish to acknowledge that wherever we are joining from, that we stand on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land and give our thanks to elders past and present for their sustained and ongoing care for country, so that country may continue to care for us. I'm thrilled today to invite two greatly respected scholars and citizens of the Gugu Nation, who are well known to us here at JCU. Prof. Yvonne Cadet-James has been a powerhouse in Indigenous health practice, advocacy and research for more than 45 years, since becoming a registered nurse at just 16 years old. And in that time, she's been a lead and a chief investigator on research projects funded by the NHMRC, its MRFF, the ARC, IRSN, the Lowitja Institute and others across a whole variety of projects focused on empowerment, social and emotional well-being and mental health, maternal, adolescent and child health, as well as research ethics and impact. And she's led national reforms that have both transformed policy and practice in Indigenous research, mentoring generations, including the current generation of Indigenous researchers and community organisations to self-determine their own research agendas and strategies. Today, she's the co-director of the Gugu Badhun Jiman Research Centre and remains adjunct professor here at JCU, as well as at CQU and UQ. Joining her today is Dr. Janine Gertz, also a Gugu Badhun citizen and co-director of the Gugu Badhun Jiman Research Centre with Prof. Cadet-James. And her PhD, as everyone I think here knows, was undertaken at JCU. It was on Gugu Badhun sovereignty, self-determination and nationhood, and it won the prestigious biennial 2023 Stana Prize awarded by ATSIS for the best academic writing by an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander author. After holding academic positions at UNSW, she has most recently joined the UQ ARC Centre of Excellence for Indigenous Futures as a postdoc research fellow. They each stand alone as impactful and important scholars, and together they reflect important intergenerational and multi-generational work that characterises Indigenous research, and more specifically, which they'll be speaking with us about today, building Gugu Badhun self-determination and self-government, and thinking through these processes as they're relevant both at the international and local level. So, very grateful to both of you to have your experience and expertise in the room with us, and on behalf of all of us at the IRC and JCU, thanks for your time. I know it's going to be a pleasure to learn with you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just acknowledging yourself and also Professor Nakata, whose presentations have gone before us, setting the scene for important areas of self-determination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'd like to start, we would like to start by acknowledging country. We acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians on the lands on which we all stand today, and those across this country, the creators and knowledge holders of unique knowledge systems, the first scientists, researchers, educators and explorers. Our thanks to our ancestors and elders for their sacrifices, wisdom and guidance. Janine and I will be doing a bit of a tag team presentation, so please bear with us. Hopefully all will go well. And I'll hand over to Janine.
Thank you, Arnie, Professor Yvonne. But just to provide an overview of today's presentation, just wanted to show you the logic of the flow of our information we want to provide to you today. But it's, first of all, of course, we want to introduce you to Gugu Badhun country, culture and community in a way that is enough to set it up for our conversations about self-determination. I mean, that could be a seminar in itself, but we need to get onto the important discussions about how Gugu Badhun is going to be working towards a program of building self-determination and self-government through a framework of Gugu Badhun nation building. We're going to be talking about self-determination, whether it's just a right to hold or possess, or is it something that we need to action and do. So we're going to be talking through two examples that Gugu Badhun is engaging with to normalise processes of self-determination within our nation. So yeah, community planning processes and Gugu Badhun's governance of Gugu Badhun research. I want to start by introducing you all to Gugu Badhun country. Now on the screen is a photo of a part of a mural which is painted at that Greenvale State School on Gugu Badhun country. Those two main figures there depict our most important creation story. They are two of our ancestor beings. The one on the left is Namanali, and that's the bronze-winged pigeon, and the one on the right is Bunbumba, the pheasant. Now this is a very abridged, quick version of the story, but our two ancestor beings were fighting, and this bronze-winged pigeon is known as a fast flyer. But the pheasant with his long tail is a bit more clumsy. And the pheasant was getting so angry that he, couldn't catch this bronze-winged pigeon. And he got so angry and had a spite, he set the country alight, and the fire got out of control, and it got so hot that it made the rocks and the lava flow. So it melted the rocks and made the lava flow. So showing you a aerial map of Gugu Badhun country, you can see the lava scars and the flow from the Kinrara crater. So Gugu Badhun people maintain that we are descendants of the original, of that ancient geological event on country, and we have many other stories that relate to volcanic activity on Gugu Badhun country. So there is the really large lava flow from the Kinrara crater. Or volcano, sorry. Now, if you visit Gugu Badhun country, this is what it looks like at the local level. Gugu Badhun country is known as basalt country, and there is photo evidence there of our ancestors' interaction with the Gugu Badhun landscape. Now that lava and all the basalt country is how we understand the Gugu Badhun universe, because the way that water is captured, released, and it flows is affected by that, the basalt rock. So that's, our understanding and our cosmology as to how the Gugu Badhun universe was created, both the physical and the metaphysical. Over to you, Yvonne.
So just an overview of Gugu Badhun. So Gugu Badhun country is located in the upper Burdekin region of North Queensland, about 230 kilometres drive northwest of Townsville on the western side of the Great Dividing Range. And neighbours are Walgarugaba, Nwagi, Warragumay, Warranyu to the north, Yuman and Udali to the west, and Gurjara to the south. Native title contest determination was achieved over our core country in 2012, recognising exclusive and non-exclusive rights to access and use of our country for cultural activities for approximately 650,000 hectares of land. We also have 2 pending determinations in process not covered by the original 2012 determination. Gugu Badhun have a registered native title body corporate that is our primary government structure. The representation on the Gugu Badhun board is drawn from the 5 family groups that make up Gugu Badhun. We have Gugu Badhun families living on Gugu Badhun country. However, the majority of our people live in the regional towns surrounding our ancestral homelands, Charters Towers, Townsville, Innisfail, Tully, Cairns, and the Atherton Tablelands. Our estimated population is about 1,500.
So we primarily call ourselves freshwater people. There's not any interaction with saltwater. We're very inland. So let's talk about what self-determination is. Like, we've had a number of seminars leading up to this, so I won't readdress that, but just to say, for the purposes of this seminar, we're going to use self-determination at its broadest as a human right of all peoples to freely determine their own political and economic status. The normative characteristic of self-determination within the international system is the right to political participation within the internal governance of the democratic UN member states. Now, that sounds straightforward, but within the paradigm of state legal and political frameworks, practical applications and expressions of self-determination are sometimes problematic, particularly when a minority of populations, such as Indigenous people, seek to exercise our right to self-determination. And that's because our aspirations for our countries, our communities, our cultures and economies are often in direct conflict with the political objectives of the Australian state. And we must understand that the exercise of self-determination from the perspective of a state, and we have to understand self-determination from the perspective of the people within its territories. But, you know, from the perspective of the state, expressions of self-determination have to be limited, especially when it is exercising, or the state is exercising authority and control over its population and resources within its territories. And so from the perspective of the people, self-determination is a right to have a say over the decisions that affect their daily lives. And so this really often does create political conflict. The state expects self-determination to be exercised in a manner that preserves the territorial integrity, the political unity, and preserves its sovereignty. And in fact, all international instruments that articulate a right to self-determination also have a clause that upholds the sovereignty of UN member states. And in its responsibility to all its citizens and its population majority, a UN member state will limit a people's entitlement to self-determination. And how this generally plays out is that people are allowed to have a level of control over their own destiny, to pursue their own economic, social and cultural development, as long as it doesn't cause political disunity somehow or challenge state sovereignty too much. The United Nations Economic and Social Council organisation held a conference back in the 1990s, and it was a right, they discussed the right of cultural groups the right of peoples to meet their human needs, the needs of that group to preserve their identity and culture. And they outlined that self-determination was an ongoing process, which contains 3 elements. So they talk about a choice in determining how lives are governed in their own developmental paths, participation in decisions that affect their lives, and control over their own lives and futures, including economic and social and cultural development. Now, whilst international standards like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People are an important tool for political advocacy and engagement with the Australian governments. However, if we start from a place where our goals and aspirations are limited by the Australian state's sovereignty, by engaging with that just simply as a right to self-determination, we need to build our own versions of self-determination that come out of the inner logic and values of a cultural group. So in other words, build our self-determination agenda out of our own sovereignties instead of Australian state legal and political frameworks. And in this way, we will affect the way that Australian state will interact with us. In this way, we argue that we should use the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as a minimum standard, but it shouldn't let us stop us from moving beyond this state limitations of self-determination. And we need to start exploring self-determination as a concept and build it as a political doctrine of self-realisation and self-legitimisation. Self-realisation meaning fulfilling our own potential. Self-legitimisation being an act, process or ideology that becomes legitimate through its attachment to the norms and values within a given society. So another way of saying that is it's the processes of making something acceptable and normal within a group. So when we're talking about Gugu self-determination, we're talking about the processes and tasks, the techniques, the procedures that's required for self-realisation and self-legitimisation of our self-governing political institutions and our organisational and operational practices. This is the point I'd like you to hold on to as we now move to explain two of the strategies that Gugu is employing to self-realise and self-legitimise our goals and aspirations for our community, our culture, our economy and governance. So just reiterating again that these two examples are through our community planning and Gugu research. To build cultural and political legitimacy, we must do this through a process of what we call Gugu civic engagement. Gugu civic engagement refers to Gugu citizens' engagement with the political governance of the Gugu Nation. And this is about participation in the business of the Gugu Nation as distinct from settler state matters. I'll let you read the definition on that screen, but this is forthcoming in an imminent publication called Gugu Sovereignty Sundays, an adaptable online nation building method, which will be published in the Journal of Australian Indigenous Issues very soon. So community planning documents, they serve the following self-determinative purposes. Firstly, by articulating the agreed short to medium term goals of the nation and by charting how Gugu are going to transition to the next phase of social change. Secondly, by guiding the decision making of the Gugu leadership. And thirdly, but most importantly, it can be used to keep Gugu Nation's governing body accountable to the Gugu people. Community planning documents are an important tool in the short to medium term. However, it's important that the Gugu Nation hold a very long-term and strategic view in achieving its goals for our culture, community and country and economy. Because we've been around for millennia, as I outlined in our creation stories and our connection to our country, we have to still consider what Gugu culture, community and country and economy would look like in 100 years, 1,000 years, even 10,000 years, because that is in our thinking. And we must act now for the future. So the Gugu Aboriginal Corporation, Registered Native Title Body Corporate, is the incumbent organisation which oversees and facilitates Gugu business. It's a lesser form of political governance via a corporate structure, but we're working on the establishment of political governance higher than the Native Title Body Corporate. But the Gugu Aboriginal Corporation staff and governance structure that represent the 5 constituent family groups, they oversaw this overall community engagement process and formally adopted the strategic plan at a properly constituted meeting of the corporation. But the strategic plan was developed by an extensive community engagement process, which we had previously used many times. We were very used to it, and therefore it was normalised for and by the Gugu people. But the development of the plan was informed by 3 rounds of input from engagement with directors and members at a number of workshops around Far North Queensland, and it was supported and backed by research. The development of the second iteration of the strategic plan was informed from the learning and experiences from the previous strategic plan. I'll put it up on the board in a sec. But it outlines the measurements of the internal version of our planning documents outlines the measurements of engagement across Gugu, the mechanisms for gathering input, so the numbers of face-to-face workshops, surveys, phone interviews, who was involved in the engagement process, including the individuals' names and the membership of that family group, or the Gugu family group, and the locations and engagement activities that were held so that input was made accessible across the Gugu community. So facilitation-led workshops were led by a consultant company that Gugu engaged, and although one could argue that the social relations and rules of the process were influenced by or directed by these external parties, the process was not inconsistent with Gugu cultural and social protocols, and it was the responsibility of the Gugu leadership and Gugu governance body to oversee that engagement process to ensure that a principle of free, prior and informed consent was embedded in the consultation and engagement processes amongst the community. And even though Gugu is happy to partner with external agents for processes like these, Gugu self-determination will be strengthened when we control and deliver every aspect of the strategic planning processes, so right from facilitation, the funding and internal endorsement. The next plan from 2020 to 2025 was presented as a framework of social change and of Gugu self-determination. And it is to be achieved through interconnected governance relationships that facilitate and reinforce self-realisation and self-legitimisation amongst the Gugu citizens, so individuals, family units and family groups. Gugu leadership, we include with directors, elders and knowledgeable persons. Political governance, so the decision-making bodies with delegated authority, and service delivery organisations that's responsible for implementing decisions on behalf of the nation. So right now that's the Gugu Aboriginal Corporation. But Gugu government must play a leadership role in all the manifestations of Gugu self-determination. So Gugu is about to enter into our third round of an iteration of community planning processes, and it's an opportunity for Gugu governance to demonstrate what's been achieved to date and the difference between the goals and aspirations between the first and the second community plan really does demonstrate a stronger or lifting of aspirations and the desire to control our own future. But I'm positive that our third community planning document will demonstrate a further and stronger incremental change and stronger expressions of sovereignty, self-determination, nationhood and self-government, because alongside of these processes, we have been building people's political literacy and having a number of workshops about what is self-determination, sovereignty, nationhood, etc. And this is where I'll leave it to Annie Yvonne now to talk about our research.
Thanks, Janine. So our Gugu Jimma Research Centre was established in probably about 7 years ago, but our engagement with research started in about 2000, where we had a number of projects that we were successful in funding, several of those being in collaboration with JCU. So the Gugu Research Centre is a governance structure set up within Gugu to facilitate and drive Gugu research agenda. Jimin is the Gugu word for fire stick, which is a literal and metaphorical tool for transferring fire, and for Gugu people symbolises the transfer of knowledge through research and practice. The Research Centre is responsible for coordinating and driving all Google Badhun research activities, including engagement, strategy, methods, ethics, protocols, and reporting. The Research Committee is responsible for the governance and decision-making regarding the Centre's research activities, which have endorsed a number of Google Badhun nation building projects. The objectives of the Centre is to drive research that respects Google Badhun history, culture, values, and knowledge systems, furthers Google Badhun sovereignty and self-determination agenda, strengthens research capacity and research knowledge translation within Google Badhun, and provides an evidence base to inform internal Google Badhun decision-making structures. The design and development of the Centre has been a collaboration led by myself, Janine, and several Google Badhun people with research skills and experience. And I'd like to acknowledge Velda Wallace, Coralie Achterberg, as part of that committee. And in keeping with succession planning, we have a number of Google Badhun people from newer generations joining that committee, which is important for ongoing commitment to self-determination. So an overview of our nation building projects. There's a very basic overview of 4 interconnected projects which build off each other. But as you can see, they contribute to the overall theme of Google Badhun nation building. So the first one, growing Google Badhun self-determination through business enterprise, 2015 to 2016. Then Janine's doctoral thesis, that project completed in 2022 on the topic of Google Badhun sovereignty, self-determination and nationhood. And number 3, Google Badhun Nation Building Project, which is part of the ARC Discovery Grant between 2019 and 2023, entitled The Prerequisite Conditions of Indigenous Self-Government. And number 4, it's a very practical operational project that facilitates the development of Google Badhun knowledge through a research governance structure which underpins the projects discussed within the Google Badhun Research Centre. All of the projects have been built off the digital history projects, language projects, and the Google Badhun book, People of the Valley of Lagoons. And as I said, that all started back in about 2000.
So just a very quick overview as to what Indigenous Nation or rebuilding is, but it comes out of 30+ years of research from the Harvard Project for American Indian Economic Development and the Native Nations Institute at the University of Arizona. They discovered that, not discovered, but their research demonstrated that there's 5 core principles of Indigenous nation building. The nations that demonstrated really strong economic development had these attributes. So they demonstrated or really had a sovereignty attitude. They were willing and able to assert a self-governing power. And they had capable governing institutions. There was a cultural match in their institutions and their governing structures. So it wasn't just a simple adoption of external governance structures. They had a strategic orientation, a very long-term approach to the development, and the leadership was publicly spirited. It wasn't that individuals are there for themselves, they were really there for the whole of the community. The first project that Google Badhun entered into, which engaged formally with the Indigenous Nation building framework, was this project back in 2015. It was a very small research project which had asked how Google Badhun might continue its self-determination through economic development, but specifically through the establishment of business enterprises. This was a project led by Teresa Portray and myself, but this research project involved discussion groups and workshops that in which Google Badhun people could identify important values underpinning economic development for the nation. So it was identifying several business opportunities also, some of which have progressed, but we shared these initial findings at our annual Google Badhun Cultural Camp and back in 2016, and it's included in academic publication, which citations are on the screen. But the main argument within this paper is that when economic development is driven by the cultural values of a nation, and directly contributes to the cultural self-determination programs of the nation. It's an act of resistance to colonialism and to capitalism. So this initial project informed the continuation of further Indigenous nation building research with Gugu Badhun. Then we get to my doctoral research project, in which I examined Gugu Badhun's situation post-colonisation, and I've proposed programs of sovereignty, self-determination, nationhood and self-government to the Gugu Badhun Nation. And these interrelated programs are important in the discussions around local level self-government in the context of treaties and agreement making between Indigenous nations and Australian government. So the research draws on international customary law, international human rights standards and domestic public policy arrangements through the disciplines of Indigenous studies and political science, history and sociology. But the proposed programs are about bringing Gugu Badhun's ancient jurisdictions into a more modern era in order to respond to our present situation, post-colonisation, but more importantly, to start the work of deliberately designing and working towards a post-colonial future. I think we don't probably have time to go into the details of the proposed programs, but suffice to say that they're proposed in a way that they're not determinative. They are ways that Gugu Badhun can build these programs and design them for ourselves, but provide a framework. Let's get to the prerequisite conditions for Indigenous self-government. And that's the ARC Discovery Grant. Sorry, Annie, you've already started talking to it. It's yours.
That's okay. So the Gugu Badhun Nation Building Project was part of the ARC Discovery Grant between 2019 and 2023, entitled The Prerequisite Conditions of Indigenous Self-Government. Through this project, Gugu Badhun Aboriginal Corporation partnered with researchers from the University of Technology, Sydney, Native Nations Institute, and the University of Arizona and James Cook University. The Noongar Nation was also involved in this project, which built off previous Indigenous nation building projects with Nunanjeri, Witchandamara and Wiradjuri nations here in Australia, and off the 30 plus years of research out of the Harvard project, as Janine spoke about before. And this has led to longer term, more sustainable economic development outcomes for Native nations in North America. In the context of the Gugu Badhun component of the project, GBAC, Gugu Badhun Aboriginal Corporation, collaborated with the research team in designing and delivering the research activities within the Gugu Badhun Nation Building Project. This project demonstrated an increase in political literacy, lifting your Gugu Badhun aspirations for community, country, culture, economy and governance. And this was demonstrated in community planning documents and within Gugu Badhun policies and solutions to negative impacts of colonisation within a series of community events. So Gugu Badhun nation building research activities that were delivered and outputs were directed through Sovereignty Sunday online seminars, individual and family unit interviews, Gugu Badhun Citizenship Forum, and Constitutional Preamble Workshop in 2022.
When we were talking about building political literacy, the Sovereignty Sunday online webinars was in the time of COVID, and we had to shift our original thinking around face-to-face workshops to something a bit more online. But in terms of it ended up being a bit of a blessing, because what this was a series of webinars on a Sunday morning, which people could just be in their pajamas and listening into workshops or some information about why self-government, what's nation decision-making look like, what's the difference between nation constitutions and corporate constitutions, what's the difference between developing an economy versus businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So what we now have is educational tools that are relevant and specific to Gugu in this situation. So following a little bit of information given, there was online discussions, and so what we've got out of that is useful tools that are now available for our citizens to access asynchronous, well, you know, whatever that word is, but later when they've got in their own time. But that's just some of the resources. And then we held a citizenship forum where we started to discuss things like who is Gugu. This is a very important conversation that I think all of us are starting to engage in, but who is and who isn't Gugu is something that we have to take on the responsibility for and not leave to native title anthropologists, but having our own techniques and procedures for that. But not only just who is, but what is our rights that come from being Gugu, but also our responsibility. Most importantly, what does the responsibility bring from being Gugu? So in all of this, our conclusion is that the programs that we outline in this presentation are about Gugu no longer simply rejoicing in the fact that we've survived colonisation, but taking on the burden and the responsibility of our sovereignty and self-determination through deliberate actions of nationhood and self-government. Gugu self-determination and self-government demands that the nation have the necessary policies, procedures, technologies for developing, endorsing, implementing, reviewing, representing and resetting collective aspirations of its constituency. In addition to this, the Gugu Nation must have political institutions, have to have the governing structures to monitor, report, oversee and represent them. That's because self-determination creates rules, goals, aspirations. It also creates expectations, rights, roles, responsibilities and obligations through the requirement for autonomy and self-government. So in the true spirit of self-determination, the ongoing work of these programs has to be undertaken by Gugu people ourselves, and that is because self-determination, Gugu self-determination, demands that processes that allow people to participate in decision-making processes, to exercise choice and control over those decisions in environments that are encased by Gugu language and culture, and for them to be sustained, they have to be designed, implemented and normalised by the Gugu Nation. We can't assume that social and political transformation will just somehow we'll assume some sort of kind of mystical quality and it'll magically happen. We have to have the necessary social consciousness, social relations and the political habits that will embed themselves within the Gugu Nation. And that's why deliberative, prefigurative programs that build Gugu's self-determination and self-government have to be implemented and controlled by the Gugu Nation to ensure a future for our country, our culture and community. We'll leave you with a photo of country. It's a place near, we call Reader Brook, just to leave it on discussions. But I've got a slide there for research output if people are interested in that, but you can Google Gugu, I think you'll get it.
Thank you, Dr. Janine, and many thanks, Ani Prof. Yvonne. A round of applause in the room and a virtual round of applause from those of us online.